The 2020 fundraising battle reached a milestone this weekend. Sunday was the first quarter fundraising deadline for presidential campaigns. Candidates have until later this month to report their totals. But one contender is already talking about his numbers. Pete Buttigieg says he's raised more than $7 million during the first 3 months of 2019. The South Bend, Indiana mayor is the first to unveil how much he raised in that time span. Lessig joins me now from Boston. He ran for the Democratic nomination in 2016 on a platform that included campaign finance reform. He's currently a professor at Harvard Law School and the founder of the organization Equal Citizens. And CBSN political reporter Caitlin Huey-Burns joins me on set here. Welcome to you both. Lawrence, let me start with you. How critical is this first round of fundraising for a candidate?
Well, of course, it's incredibly important to give people a signal about which candidates are going to be credible in this race. Obviously, still politics in America is driven by money. But it also is a chance for these candidates to highlight their focus and their belief that reform of the system is needed. And Mayor Pete has done that, and I think others will as well.
Caitlin, I want to pull some of your reporting from earlier this year. You write, Democrats, quote, are betting big on small dollars. This is a balancing act, though. Explain this balancing act with the grassroots.
Well, it's really interesting because you're seeing these campaigns make something of a value statement by the way they're raising money for their campaigns. So gone are the days of the big dollar fundraisers and the race to kind of court these high dollar donors. They're very much focusing on those who can give $5, $25, $27 or is the average contribution to Bernie Sanders, for example. And the reason for that is that they're very much focused on this grassroots campaign because they believe that they want their campaigns to speak directly to the people. There's this very anti-corruption, anti-inequality theme going on in the Democratic primary right now, and that serves many different issues. Campaign finance is among them. I do hear from voters all the time about the need to get money out of politics, and this is a way for candidates to say, you are running this campaign. I'm accountable to you, the actual voter, and not the big donors. And so it's more about transparency as well.
But it takes money to run these campaigns. So what is the impact of rejecting these kind of fundraisers?
Absolutely. There is going to be an impact on that. First, there are so many candidates in this race and not a lot of money to go around for all of them. So take someone like Elizabeth Warren, who has made a point to say she's not doing these big fundraising dinners. She is going to be raising just grassroots donations and going directly to the people to ask for that money. That is great in theory, and that is something that lots of candidates would like to do. But it could also be a shield for if she reports not having great fundraising numbers, not having raised as much money as these other candidates. So it is a really tricky balancing act, and it does require a really strong infrastructure to raise that kind of money.
And on that point, Lawrence, this weekend, in fact, Senator Warren lost her finance director over her decision to reject high-dollar fundraisers. Is that strategy sustainable when you have this widening field of Democrats who are competing for money?
Well, I think that what these candidates recognize is the enormous frustration people have with the system. So I think much more important than how they're raising money right now is how they inspire people to get involved in their campaign because they're committing to reforming the system. We had 22 states in 2018 that passed ballot measures that were reforming the system driven by citizens more than any time in American history, reflecting this deep frustration and the desire for change. So I think that the more important issue is not the next year. The more important issue is what they will do to change the system, to give people confidence that they actually have a government they can trust again.
It's interesting. In order to make the debate stage this cycle, candidates need to collect contributions from at least 65,000 donors. Lawrence, what do you make of that rule?
Well, I think it's a good rule to show that there's broad-based support. And I think that candidates will get support the more they signal that they are the kind of candidate that will give people confidence in the system again. We're going to launch, Equal Citizens is launching a series of town halls in New Hampshire with presidential candidates to talk about the reform issues, from money in politics to gerrymandering to the Electoral College to voter suppression, because there are so many people in that primary state in particular who are so deeply frustrated with the system and they want to see candidates who are promising real change.
I want to get to that more in just a moment, but I wonder, are there any candidates who are not relying on small donors, Caitlin, and at this point, can they afford to do so?
Well, it's interesting. Take someone like Joe Biden, for example, who is used to kind of the old way of doing things in Democratic politics. And by old, I mean just a few years ago when you did have these bigger donors. And so there is this question of now there are so many people in the race, and you have people like Beto O'Rourke and Bernie Sanders who have shown that they can raise $6 million in a single day through their organization's grassroots fundraising program. That does put a lot of pressure on someone like Joe Biden. You have others, Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, who want to focus on small dollar donations and are focused on that, but they're not canceling these fundraisers that they host, Kirsten Gillibrand and other. So they are trying to make the point that they want to focus on small dollar donors, but the reality of running a presidential campaign in this day and age requires a lot of money. And if you don't have the infrastructure, if you don't have that momentum and able to do so, it's much more difficult.
Lawrence, I'm curious, what else is it that you would like to see specifically this cycle from the DNC to give people confidence in the campaign finance system?
Well, I think that the thing is for candidates to talk about the real change they're going to bring about. This horse race about how much money people are raising right now, which is like the horse race of where the polls are, is really not the question about how we're going to get some system that we can trust. So I think that if candidates talk about how we're going to fund campaigns in the future so that special interests don't control the candidates, and how are we going to get a system that doesn't gerrymander so that people actually pick their elected representatives rather than the representatives picking the people, and how are we going to make it so people can vote, they can feel part of the system rather than being suppressed by the techniques that states do. Those are the issues that I think would really signal to the public that real change is possible here, because the reality is Congress could tomorrow pass legislation that would solve 85% of the problems that confront us right now with our democracy. And I think if candidates talked about that, they would get people excited in the system again.
So, Lawrence, going back to your organization, Equal Citizens, you said you've got a new town hall series. Starting next week, you're going to be focusing on reform issues. Do you think now, as we sit here in 2019, there is a more receptive audience when you talk about systemic reforming on these various issues, whether they be gerrymandering, whether they be campaign finance reform? Do you think now there's perhaps a different way that audiences are ready to receive that kind of information?
Absolutely. As I said, we saw in the last election cycle the biggest progressive reform movement in the history of America, 22 different states passing reform measures, from gerrymandering reform to ranked choice voting to systems that have greater ethics in their politics, because people are so deeply frustrated. And these were primarily driven by citizens. They were not politicians pushing this. And so I think that this is a time when America is so eager to see something done. And let's remember, Donald Trump came to office last time promising he would drain the swamp, triggering a very significant portion of his base to be focused on how we could get a political system that we could all trust again. So I think this is a perfect moment for Democrats to pick up the same baton and start talking about what they would do. And that's exactly what we want to try to do in this series, to get them to focus on the reforms they would push and what priority they would put on it, so that the voters in New Hampshire can begin to pick candidates on the basis of which will give them the commitment to reform that those people in New Hampshire want.
All right, looking forward to it. Lawrence Lessig, Caitlin Huey-Burns, thanks to you both.